there's this idea that was suggested at All-Star Weekend that you broached into. It's your pinned tweet on your Twitter profile. A
Yeah.
Legends home run derby, and it just like pops a light into everyone's head of wow. And personally for me, I'm like, well, as long as it replaces the celebrity softball game, I'm all ears for it. But we're sitting here looking at this idea, and I was rereading the article yesterday as we're getting ready for this, and I'm sitting here and thinking this as you got to talk to some people at All-Star Weekend about this and hear all the reaction from it. Is something like this feasible?
I think it's going to happen, to be honest with you. The story of it is incredible, really. The whole thing happened so organically, where Ken Griffey Jr. wanders over to the set of MLB Tonight before the home run derby, and Albert Pujols is sitting there, and a couple different points, sounds like he thinks he could still win it. He could enter and win it. You have to change the format a little bit, but he said, give him a year to train. He could do it. And Albert said, you do it, I'll do it. So now, so after this is over, like they're all kind of sitting around the production trailer, and Jim Thome sends a text and says, if they're in, I'm in. Now, Albert goes for a kind of a walk to get some air, and he runs into Big Papi, and he tells Big Papi, and he said, I'm in. Okay. And so you can see already that these guys, their blood is pumping. And if they will buy in, I don't see how it's not doable in some form. I mean, the biggest thing, well, two big things. One is somebody's got to sponsor it and pay them. Okay. Second thing is, you can't do the format of the current home run derby because, like what's Griffey now? He's like 53. 53. Think about how many times Julio swung the bat. 90 times in 3 minutes. He'd separate both shoulders. So we don't want that. Okay. But we do want him to swing. And so my proposal was the same format as the old home run derby. As many home runs as you can hit before you make 3 outs, which is a non-homer. And then just alternate. I think it'd be a really cool event that people would go nuts for. And I honestly don't see why it can happen. And like the strong impression I got when I wrote that is there's a lot of momentum already for it to happen. All I can tell you is one of the first people I ran into when I got to Cooperstown this year was Jim Thome, who I had talked to for this piece. And he looked at me and he said, hey, that column you wrote, that's got a lot of traction. So Jim Thome says it must be true.
That means Bonds has to be in this. I was like, there's no way they can keep him out of this. There's no way.
I'm totally fine with Bonds, McGuire, whoever. I don't care what people's issues are. I want to see Barry Bonds. I do.
Like we're less than, I think, a decade removed from him beating Christian Yelich and Giancarlo Stanton in a home run derby on the backfields of spring training. I do remember that story that he already beat them. So you're not telling me he couldn't win one of these things? I think he could.
Yeah, his hat size is a little smaller now, but
just a little bit.
Pretty talented human, that's all.
I've got one request for this. I mean, first off, this would be such an awesome idea. I'd be all for it. I think you're absolutely right that fans would be all for it and a lot of people would tune in. There might be a little bit of Mariners bias behind this, but I feel like we could pick up some steam with this idea. Let's get Ichiro in this thing. I mean, I always wanted to see him in the Derby forever because everybody thinks he could have been good at it. And he still takes batting practice all the time. And he's still working out. I think if he was in this, he would have a shot.
I would love that. I used to write all the time about how everybody on those teams wanted Ichiro to be in the Derby and he just wouldn't do it. But like you're seeing such a fun-loving side of Ichiro now that he's not actually playing. I don't see why you couldn't twist his arm with the right format.
Right.
Where do we draw the line at legend? Because I feel like we only have a certain pool to pick from in this, and we don't want the exact same players doing it every single year. So for it to not get repetitive, where are we drawing the line at? Like, what level of former athlete are we going to let in here?
Okay, so like what's your big fear? Like Dan Wilson would be in it or something?
Well, is Dan Wilson is a Mariners legend, but does Dan Wilson, would he represent on an all-star stage in someone else's park besides T-Mobile?
Yeah, you'd want more than that. I mean, Hall of Famers, that would be ideal, right? You could say multi-time all-stars, former Derby winners, that kind of thing. Like when I was going through, I kind of made up some teams, and that was like my first criteria. Did you win a Derby? And that's always a good selling point. Doesn't this sort of fit the criteria? You know what a non-legend is when you see one. So somebody have to have veto power. Should we give it to Griffey? He's pretty sure nobody's a legend, so he'd be good.
Is there a cutoff time you'd have to be retired out of baseball before entering this thing, or are you all for letting Pujols in right now, despite just getting out of it?
I don't care. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of peer pressure type stuff, and I mean, it is kind of an advantage. Albert won a round in the home run derby last year, and then he would be in the Legends Derby next year. So it's a little shaky, but I personally don't care. If we let in 2 guys who just retired and 6 guys who retired 10 years ago, and the guys who just retired always win, we could adjust as we go along. Just get it going.
Again, as long as it replaces the celebrity softball game, I think it's going to be a massive hit. Just take those sponsors and give it to them.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I'm going to guess it's not going to happen. But why can't they coexist? I think they could coexist. I've always had this idea that the All-Star game could be bigger, that the whole week could be like a festival of baseball, and one night could be Legends Home Run Derby night. There are a lot of places you could put it. A lot.
So would you put it before Futures game, celebrity softball game? Like you start All-Star week on a Friday rather than a Saturday, that sort of thing?
I'm open to anything. Okay. I did like Greg Amsinger's idea that you could have it right after the Futures game, so all those guys who played in the Futures game could sit around the field with their families and their friends and cheer on these legends, the way the non-home run derby players do at the Derby. It definitely adds to the event. But I don't know how many times I have to say this, Lau. I'm open to anything. I really am.
Okay.